Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. Last week we examined the hilarious and very light-hearted arc that is Long Ring, Long Land. And this week we are heading in the complete opposite direction and beginning an absolutely brilliant saga with Water 7. Water 7 is the 15th arc in the series, consisting of 53 manga chapters and 35 anime episodes, making it quite a modest arc in the series, which follows the Straw Hats as they attempt to repair the Going Merry on the shipbuilding island. And yes, I say attempt because as we all know at this point, Water 7 does not end well for the Going Merry, who is deemed unrepairable. It's a very shocking twist in the series that hit me right in the feels much harder than I ever would have thought possible, but it made perfect sense. The Grand Line is an absurdly rough sea, and a ship of Merry's size had been doing amazingly until now, but ultimately it was unfit for the journey going forward. And just when you think that's bad enough, things get infinitely worse. Luffy ultimately makes the really tough decision to buy a new ship, causing a rift with Usopp, ultimately leading him to leave the crew. So one thing I will praise this arc for until the end of time, probably, is how they handled Usopp. Up until this point, he had been my least favorite Straw Hat by far. I didn't like his design, I didn't like his character, and for most of the series I just sort of tolerated his presence. He'd certainly had his moments like in the Arlong or Alabasta arcs, but really I felt like he was the weak point of One Piece. Water 7 took that weak point and made Usopp into one of the most captivating characters in manga history. His journey, as irrational as it may have seemed, was full of emotion and depth, the likes of which I never thought I'd see from him. And to top it all off, he had the balls to challenge our protagonist Monkey D. Luffy to a legitimate duel, the very thought of which is laughable. I mean, Luffy versus Usopp? But this fight is actually one of the very best in the entire series. In my eyes, Usopp is finally able to prove that he is worthy of being in this series by using everything that he has learnt on his journey so far to push Luffy further than anyone would have thought possible. This fight is also one of the most brutal in One Piece because there is no satisfaction in seeing either party take a hit, unlike an actual villain. That means that every hit, no matter what the actual strength is, strikes us hard. And of course Usopp loses, and really, he never had a chance, but his actions in this arc earned my respect as a reader and converted me into a lifelong Usopp fan. But that's enough about the dark stuff for now because we've got a lot more to come. For now I'd like to take a break and talk about the amazing scenery that is Water 7. After coming from a fairly bland island, the complex and beautiful architecture of this island was very welcome in my eyes. It's very clearly inspired by Venice, right down to the knockoff of the Rialto Bridge, but it has a nice identity of its own. Personally, I really enjoy that water is almost always present in this city. I mean, I guess it's called Water 7, so perp derp, but in this manga about pirates, we really don't get to see enough water. Generally, we find ourselves marooned on an island for a huge epic arc, so I just find it really nice that water is so consistently a part of the environment here. Water 7 is also one of the very rare arcs that take advantage of different lighting conditions, which is particularly prominent and wonderful in the anime. This arc sports a complete collection of daylight, sunset, and evening lighting states, which really add a nice dynamic layer of an ever-evolving aesthetic to this arc. Now let's segue back into characters and discuss a certain Nico Robin. This saga has a few different primary storylines, but Robin is the thread that ties everything together. She disappears very early on in the arc, which creates a nice sense of intrigue, although it isn't overpowering because of the initial focus on Usopp. This makes Robin's quote-unquote betrayal very effective because the seeds were planted in the background of the story, allowing Robin's plot to grow quite organically. And this is a story that is not resolved during this arc. In fact, Water 7 leaves us in a pretty bad state all around, with 2 Straw Hats having left the crew and the remainder facing off against seemingly unbeatable enemies. And those enemies are some of my favorite in the series. CP9 took One Piece villainy to an entirely new realm, with their focus on assassination and political intrigue. And the way Oda just sprinkled them into the story as shipwrights, a secretary, and even a bar owner really emphasized that secret government organization vibe because they sure as hell had me fooled. CP9 also represented a new level of power and left me legitimately wondering how the Straw Hats could possibly stand up to them. This is a similar feeling we've had before, for example with Crocodile, but the difference is that once Luffy figured out Crocodile's weakness, he was easily brought down to Luffy's level. However, CP9 essentially have no weakness. You just need to be stronger than them. It's that simple and that terrifying. In addition to that, their first true appearance happens in full menacing costume, which was a fantastic decision. The classic idea of horror movies is that the monster is always scarier when you can't see them, and I think that holds very true in a wide variety of other cases, such as right here. The fact that you can't even see simple things like facial expressions adds a brilliant layer of fear that can only be caused by the great unknown. Of course, underneath all that, they all had really cool designs as well, all of which I still love to this day. For the record, Kaku is my favorite member of CP9. He's a fantastic example of how you design a really badass character with a long nose. Very early on, I also remember hoping that he was going to be the shipwright that joined the crew as well, although I guess 2 long noses is just too much for any one crew. Speaking of potential crew members, we also have the introduction of Paulie, and I don't know how purposely this was done, but during Water 7 it really looks like he may be the one to join the Straw Hats. He had all of the calling cards of a potential crew member, a unique ability, a well thought out design, and lots of quirky comic potential. In retrospect, I feel like his role was very much that of a red herring, in kind of the same way that Vivi acted as a red herring for Robin. Now this leads us finally to a huge character introduced during this arc, and his name is Frankie. Looking back on Water 7 is really weird in regards to Frankie because his story really gets overshadowed by just about everything else happening. His story sneaks up on you, even more so than Robin's does actually, and it's actually a really cool moment when his connection to Iceberg is revealed and we see their flashback. Frankie does however start off as an antagonist in Water 7, and a pretty despicable one at that. It's actually quite amazing just how quickly his character becomes quite likable, and you forget just how much of a dick he was to Usopp. In fact, the heart of the Water 7 arc definitely belongs to Frankie. Because he's used mainly as a super cool comic relief character these days, I often forget about just how tragic his past actually was. And I also don't think I can escape this review without mentioning the legendary shipwright Tom, who was responsible for building the Ora Jackson, also known as the ship of Pirate King Gold D. Roger. Tom is a perfectly crafted father figure. He's also just a pretty badass fisherman in general, and quite possibly my favorite fisherman in the series behind Jinbei. And just as a side note, we all know that Tom was totally getting it on with Kokoro, right? Yeah, you enjoyed that mental image. But with the final thread of Frankie in place, I'd like to lay out the claim that Water 7 is probably the single best arc in the series in regards to writing and plot. There is a lot going on during this arc, and it really takes a master craftsman to prevent this arc from becoming a muddled mess, which it very well could have been. In modern One Piece, Oda actually applies this new style of phenomenally convoluted writing into most arcs, especially those of great length like Dressrosa or Whole Cake Island, but I still don't think it has ever been pulled off more effectively than Water 7. This arc just does such a good job of setting up this saga and getting the Straw Hats well and truly involved in the plot, which was something that had been somewhat missing from the last 2 major sagas, Alabasta and Skypiea. These arcs featured the Straw Hats on a more sympathetic mission, helping out others, while Water 7 really makes the stakes personal and elevates the storytelling of One Piece as a result. And the hard work put in during Water 7 really pays off going into the future with some absolutely spectacular events to come. But that pretty much does it for Water 7. Next week it's all aboard as we begin the pursuit of Nico Robin and jump onto the sea train. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to like, favorite or subscribe, and please do comment with your thoughts on Water 7. This has been the Grand Line Review, and I'll see you next time.